Welcome to our Careers in Teaching panel. My name is Ran. I'm the PhD candidate from the Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy, and I'm also working as a graduate student career development coordinator with the UBC Career Center. I will be moderating the session today. I want to let you know that this panel is a collaboration between the UBC Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, UBC Career Center, and Simon Fraser University. I would like to thank the organizers and the panel for being here and for making it happen. And also, I would like to acknowledge that the UBC Vancouver and Simon Fraser University campuses are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, Katsi, Kukwalum, Kikayat, Kwantlen, Semiahoo, and Swatson peoples. The UBC Okanagan campus is located on the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan peoples. Many of you may be joining from other places today, and I would like to invite you to reflect on the history of the land wherever you are located today. So the general structure of our panel is going to be a short intro of the panelists and the short opening question, followed by the panel discussion of the prepared questions. And also we already got a list of pre-submitted questions. So I think I might also follow up with that. But if any of you guys have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And I think I'll address that in the end or whenever I see fit or related to our discussion. So that's about kind of my short intro, and also this panel, the session will be recorded. And also I want to give a shout out to two future panels that's also coming up in April and May. The one in April, it's going to be non-academic research, and the one in May is going to be on business development and consulting. So if you are interested in any of the topic, please keep an eye out for Jackie's emails. She will have more details to follow up. Without further ado, let's get our panel going. First, let me introduce you to our four panelists. They are Dr. Anna Blackney, Dr. Isabeau Iqbal, Ms. Nicole Smith, and Dr. Derek Laplin. Dr. Anna Blackney is an assistant professor in the Nicole Smith Laboratories and School of Biomedical Engineering at UBC. She received her Bachelor of Science in Chemical and Biological Engineering from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and her PhD is in bioengineering from the University of Washington. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Imperial College London on the development of molecular and biomaterial engineering strategies for delivery of self-amplifying RNA. Her lab uses bioengineering, molecular biology, and immunology approaches to develop the next generation of RNA vaccines and therapies. She is also passionate about science communication and runs a TikTok channel dedicated to education about RNA biotechnology, which now has 250,000 followers and over 80 million views. Next one is Dr. Isabel Iqbal. Dr. Isabel Iqbal enjoys two related career paths, one as an educational consultant at a Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, and the other as an independent career coach. At UBC, Isabel supports faculty members and other instructors to grow professionally in their roles as instructors. She leads several initiatives at the center, including the formative peer review of teaching program and teaching dossier. In her private coaching practices, Isabel works with ambitious perfectionists who are ready to move forward in their higher education career. She also facilitates workshops for organizations that are committed to promoting self-well-being. Isabel has a PhD in education with a focus in teaching and learning in higher education, from UBC. She is a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation and a Gallup certified coach. In her non-work time, Isabel enjoys being active outdoors, connecting with families and friends, blogging and singing. Next, we have Ms. Nicole Smith. Nicole Smith is an archaeologist, founder of Archaeology in Schools, and author of the new book, Dig Deep, Connecting Archaeology, Oceans, and Us. She is also the Cultural Heritage Initiative Coordinator for the UN Ocean Decade Collaborative Center for the Northeast Pacific, and a steering committee member of the Clam Garden Network. She has been involved in archaeological research on the BC coast since 2000, collaborating most closely with First Nations communities, the Haikai Institute, Parks Canada, and university colleagues. She has taught undergraduate courses at the University of Victoria, Molson College, and Banfield Marine Science Center. She loves to work with educators to bring archaeology into elementary and high school classrooms. She believes that archaeological stories can inspire people, empower Indigenous youth, and facilitate cross-cultural education and understanding. Nicole holds a BA and MA in anthropology from University of Victoria. Next, we have Dr. Derek Laplin. He's an assistant professor of language and literacy education in the Faculty of Education and a World Catalyst Scholar at UBC. He also served as a UBC Sustainability Fellow, Environmental Fellow at University of Edinburgh, University of Amsterdam, and Trinity College Dublin. His interdisciplinary research and teaching aim to promote social understanding and relational action on environmental, health, and well-being, and arts-based approaches through public forms of education and literacy. He is the author or editor of several books, including Ecological Exile, Rewriting Our Stories, and serves as a senior editor for environmental and sustainability education in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Education. He is also a member of the Clean Energy Research Center at UBC. All right, that's a short kind of introduction to our wonderful panelists. I thank them for their time and willingness to participate and share their wisdom and experiences with us. Okay, so I want to start off our panel with a short kind of question. So I know each of you has a kind of a different approach to teaching and on different platforms, whether it's TikTok or university classrooms, and to different audiences. Some are general public, some are secondary school students, and also in different forms, in stories or kind of publication or coaching and facilitation. So my question is, what do you enjoy the most in your approach to teaching? If anyone is ready to go, just go ahead.
We're all so polite, so I'll just start us off.
Okay, thank you.
When I was thinking about this question, so my students are faculty members, largely, within the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology. That's part-time work that I do at UBC. And then my other role is as a coach. And so within the educational developer work that I do at UBC, so my students are faculty members, and what I love the most there in terms of the approach is the one-on-one work. So I don't teach large groups. Most of my work is either facilitating workshops or working one-on-one with faculty members who come to the center and want to grow as teachers because they're committed to enhancing student learning. And as you know, if you've done any teaching, it's a big puzzle. You know, there's so many pieces to enhancing teaching and student learning. So I love that one-on-one work. And then in the coaching, it's also very similar. Most of the people I work with as a professional coach is they're faculty members or other professionals in higher ed. And so that's what feeds me. There, I'll leave it at that and turn it over.
Thank you, Isabel. Maybe Derek, because you are next to Isabel. So.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I could certainly build on that a little bit, and briefly just say that, what really inspires me to teach, and I feel like I really found my home in education, because I do really enjoy working with teacher candidates who are, in a very packed 11-month schedule, sort of preparing for, educating many different grades and many different subjects. And since I work on environmental and sustainability education, I really think that's a massive way to impact a large population of young people that are really kind of trying to build skills and understanding and values around how to really engage in this world. And so I think that's a really tremendous opportunity, I feel, to work with other educators. And it is kind of a collaboration, it feels, right? We're kind of working together, teaching each other, and sort of facilitating that process. So I'd say that's one aspect about teaching that's really quite motivating and inspiring for me.
Thank you, Derek. And then Nicole.
Great, thank you. And it's nice to meet all of you on the panel and see everyone that's here. So I guess come into teaching from a bit of an unusual path. I'm an archaeologist by training, and archaeology, of course, is the study of how people have lived in the past. And over the years, I've been really fortunate to work with different communities, First Nations communities, mostly up and down the BC coast, to learn about some of the ways that their ancestors have lived in the past. And archaeology, I mean, it's just an exciting field, and it offers these entry points for many different learners, whether they're young students or whether they're high school students or university students. And it's a discipline that just connects with so many other areas of study, whether it be biology or environmental studies or history, what have you. So the stories often are just really interesting, naturally interesting. And so what I love is, and enjoy most, is really being able to share, with permission, of course, the very interesting, positive, awe-inspiring stories, and then seeing how those resonate with people, whether that be, a young person who might be directly connected to those places through culture and seeing how that empowers them and inspires them, or how you can sort of foster these cross-cultural exchanges where you get people like really interested in wanting to learn more from one another. So for me, I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most, is seeing when you get those little sparks and moments that are so meaningful for each person.
Thank you, Nicole. What about Anna?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, really great to be here today. Thanks for having me. And kind of building off what Nicole said. So I guess if you consider kind of the two main ways I teach is through, my engineering courses and through my TikTok channel. And so in a way, they couldn't be more different. I would say the inspiration that I draw from both of them is kind of based off of quality versus quantity, right? So what's really exciting in my engineering courses is I work with small groups of students that design and build these prototypes for engineering challenges that are very real world problems. And so it's really exciting to see them develop these ideas and work together as a team and make these prototypes. And on the other hand, on TikTok, I think the real opportunity and what's really exciting for me there is just talking to and interfacing with people that I would never otherwise come across. And I think that's what is really exciting about it for me. Most of the time when I'm educating people, I'm talking to other scientists and I have, 30 minutes or an hour to talk about my science. But I think what social media really makes me hone in on is like, what is the main message? What are we trying to get people to understand? And so those two different avenues really kind of flex my teaching skills as well, and think about, what are the best approaches here in different ways of communication.
Right. And thank you all for answering the questions. And now I will move on to the kind of the panel question. So I guess the first question is, what experiences during your time at graduate school have been the most helpful in your career journey? And what are some of the experiences that you wish you had in grad study that would actually get you prepared for what you're doing now?
I'm happy to go first on this one if we want to go in reverse order this time.
Of course, anyone can, yeah, can start.
Okay, yeah, right. So yeah, I think for me, because I guess thinking about my, kind of traditional teaching, one of the things that has proven to be super helpful for me is obviously TAing during grad school. I think having that experience of actually like helping and prepare and deliver lectures and run labs for students, just having the undergrad experience is just completely invaluable. So for my grad program, Rand mentioned I went to grad school in the States and we were all required to TA. I know that's not true for every program everywhere, but usually there's opportunities to get involved in that. And truly for me, that's just kind of like was the starting point. I think as far as what I wish I had, so that was like training on kind of how to be a TA. I wish that I had, even before I started, maybe more formal training on different like pedagogical approaches or just kind of more formal training on the teaching side other than just doing the teaching. I think that's something that in general is kind of, not as available as it probably should be. And then on the social media side, I think I'm starting to see more and more of these pop up, and there's some available at UBC as well. But courses in science communication, I think, are really important. We learn through graduate studies usually how to, communicate effectively to a group of our peers for the most part, for whether that's with publications or presentations. But there's so many different audiences, right? And not necessarily just social media, but podcasting or all these different avenues that you could potentially use. And so I think that's something that I think helps you for kind of whatever you do in the future.
Right. I think I have a follow-up question with what you just said. Is that the kind of science communication somewhat related to knowledge mobilization? Because I think if you're kind of using social media, and then not all the people like who are on social media are necessarily kind of academics or they're in grad school and whatnot. So this is a much wider kind of audience. And also, I think that was kind of my question, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just ask it now. What prompts you to do teaching on social media? Because I think it's quite different, and I think it has its own challenges. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe we'll start there. So I guess as far as knowledge mobilization, I think that's a really good point. And this is really like a lesson that I've learned from being on social media, especially working in the field of RNA vaccines during the pandemic, which is that I've just realized there's such a gap between the progress that scientists make and what the public knows about, right? And I think that is what drives a lot of the vaccine hesitancy that we see. And so, this isn't just true for RNA vaccines though, right? It actually affects everything that we do in research. It's just there's such a gap between what academics are doing and what the public knows about. And so I think social media can be a really powerful tool to try and help close that gap, like tell people about these RNA vaccines as we're working on them and kind of what is the cutting edge, so that, when we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are like, oh, yeah, all of a sudden we have these RNA vaccines that are available, and it, potentially could take people less by surprise than it did. The way that I got involved is like kind of a random story. It's not something that I just elected to do on my own volition. While I was a postdoc at Imperial, I actually randomly got a call from on my office phone, and I didn't even know my office phone number there. And so whenever people called me, I was like, how do you get this number, right? And the person on the line said, oh, we're calling from the United Nations. We're working together with the Vaccine Confidence Project, trying to get more scientists and clinicians on TikTok to spread awareness about a lot of these COVID vaccines. So this was a specific like organization that I got involved in, which is called Team Halo, which was started by the UN and the Vaccine Confidence Project. So that's like how I started doing it. I like thought that call was a total scam. I was like, the weird world we live in, but like no way is the UN trying to get me to like go on TikTok right now, right? So that's how I initially got started. I had no idea what I was doing. It was like a very steep learning curve. But I kind of just was like, let's test it out. Like you never know how like things will work or what will happen. And so now my account has like grown, I don't know, way past what I ever thought it would be, but it's a really fun kind of like experiment even for me to just test out and connect with people and have conversations with people that, like I said before, that I just otherwise would never have connected with.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? We can go reverse order or, no order at all. Yeah.
Sure, I'm fine with reverse order.
Okay.
I think Anna, you covered a huge amount of it. In terms of, when you're in grad school, for me as well, I was thinking about those really key experiences we're TAing and being lab instructor, for sure. And I think I would add to that as well that I said yes to a lot of really diverse opportunities that at the time I didn't realize had a lot of teaching embedded within them. And for me, that consisted of in one instance, working on a project entirely funded by a First Nation who was having archaeological work done at one of their village sites. And one of my roles was to train youth and adults in how to do archaeological work. I also, took a job at an independent school as well, which was, very, very school related. I also worked as a consulting archaeologist, so I had lots of different experiences. I had to learn how to say no at a certain point so I could finish my degree. But it's interesting how a diversity of experience can actually have overlaps in ways you don't recognize at the moment.
Right.
And then I think the other thing, when I reflect back on my school experiences, not just grad school, but also my undergrad, was all of the new knowledge that I was learning at university that had never entered into my experiences in school. And I found myself a lot of the time just thinking, how come I never learned this? And those little moments of like, how come I never learned this? Right now is really feeding into a lot of what I do, which is like, well, I have an opportunity now to share. So some of this information is moving back and into the younger grades. And then I guess things that I would have loved to have done in grad school, mind you, this was like over 20 years ago and we were still learning how to use email. Things like social media, if I were a grad student now, I would love courses in that. And also I think the science communication as well, and how we communicate big ideas in ways that are digestible for folks who aren't necessarily grounded in the whole discipline, whatever that is.
Right. I guess that's also the point, maybe with the 3-minute thesis, and also I think UBC has the ISW that was, I think, some kind of training and teaching, which Anna was saying, that if she could have that'd be great. So for any of the participants, just so those are things available at UBC if you are still thinking about it. Yes. And then I guess next up is Derek.
Yeah, it's interesting reflecting on some of these answers. There's so many different pathways, to go here in our little window of time here. I came into graduate school, full admission here. I came in a little bit later in life, and I'd already taught in high school. I've already taught at colleges. I've taught English second language. I'd kind of been at it for a good 15 years before I became a graduate student, a PhD student, that is. I got my master's quite early. And I taught my master's program as well. And so I really had developed a sort of teaching persona in that time. And so at graduate school, I felt like really afforded me the opportunity to really think about how the pedagogies that I developed really are useful in some ways in research and other aspects of thinking about how I present or how I'm engaged in different kind of academic, disseminating information in the public, or even amongst my peers and colleagues and, mentors, supervisors. So I felt like those years of training really helped. The other thing that I'd say, whether I'd had that experience or not, one thing that was really valuable is just availing myself of all sorts of resources that universities really do have lots. And you could kind of endlessly be attending workshops, and I tried to do a lot, even though I had lots of teaching experience. I felt like I had this time and space to kind of reconnect with myself a little bit, rethink, how I want to build again a certain persona moving forward, or multiple personae. And so really utilizing those resources was really helpful. And just kind of that development of professionalization that is kind of, especially I was thinking about trying to teach more in university in different contexts. So I was really trying to professionalize in that way too, and making those kinds of transitions and leaps. I think, what I wished I'd participated in, it's a good question. A part of me is I didn't teach as much in graduate school because I didn't feel like I needed it, to be honest, because I'd had that experience. And, maybe that would have been a little bit more helpful to diversify a little bit even more when I was looking for jobs, and just having a variety of opportunities and courses to teach. So, if there are those opportunities, they're very time consuming, especially for newer instructors, but I think they're well worth it to kind of understand how time consuming they can be, and how to sort of manage that and develop yourself a little bit more. So maybe I'll stop there.
Right. Thank you, Derek. I do agree with you that you're saying there's a lot of workshops or things that you can participate of resources. And I know, like in Jackie's email, she has kind of put together a well kind of organized, those professional development opportunities. So if you're listening, just kind of do click on those emails, because I find really good workshops and events, and then sometimes even funding opportunity through her email. And
just to note that for the postdocs, UBC postdocs, so Sarah sends out a newsletter, and also Charity at SFU, there's I guess a newsletter and social media to follow as well.
Right. So just so you know that we have those resources available, and also from CTLT, which I think, Isabel will be maybe talking more about that and her experiences.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that a bit later. I love this question around what experiences during your time at graduate school have been most helpful in your career journey. So two really stand out for me. One is presenting at conferences. There's so many student conferences, and then there's also non-student conferences where at that time, you flew to or took a ferry to, drove sometimes at a hugely discounted rate. But I didn't realize, fast forward all this time, just how comfortable I became presenting at conferences, because I did it often during grad school. So that was really helpful, has been really helpful in my career journey. So if your department, faculty are having student conferences, it's fabulous practice. The other thing that really stands out for me is during my PhD, so I was in educational studies here at UBC, there were about 7 of us who formed a writing support group. And this was so that we would support one another to completion. We would also, what was really key is that we would meet every Friday, and each Friday somebody had submitted their work to the others, and then we would provide that person with feedback. And I can tell you that before that, my writing was very private, and I wouldn't have thought about doing this kind of thing. It is one of the things that has really shaped my relationship to writing over time. I became so much more comfortable with getting feedback. It was incredibly helpful in the writing of my dissertation to be able to get other readers outside of my committee to help me think through my ideas, to help me back to the communication piece that several of the other presenters have touched upon, to know when I was communicating clearly and not. And then what happened afterwards is, towards the end of my thesis, I wrote for publication quite a bit. And now that writing has shifted, and I write regularly for my blog. But that was really helpful in my career journey. So those are two things in terms of most helpful in my career journey. And then in terms of the things I wish I had participated in, I'll answer that slightly different because I don't really have a response to that. But when I was doing my PhD, I had 2 young children. I was working part-time, and I also was in a relationship with my long-term partner, who's still my partner. And it was really, really important for me that I feel good about myself as a mother. That was one of my absolute priorities going into my PhD, that I would feel good about myself. So I chose to say no to a lot, kind of back to what Nicole was saying about having to learn how to say no. So I think that I really developed that skill of setting boundaries because of the values and the priorities that I had outside of completing my PhD.
Right. I have actually a pre-submitted question that's really related to like a female kind of trying to finish their PhD. So I think I'm just gonna maybe start with this question rather than going through the orders. I think her question is tips for women who want to have children but also finish their PhD and postdoc. Does she have to postpone her studies until after having children, or are there ways to take or manage those times and kind of juggling the different responsibility and not kind of having to giving up on certain responsibility? I think Isabel was just talking about this. So I'm gonna maybe pose this question to all the panelists. Yeah. Is anything else that Isabel wanted to add or expand on that? Because I think you briefly touched on kind of having different roles, but not kind of having to give up being a mother, or yeah.
Yeah, I can add briefly and then pass it on. It was incredibly stressful. It's one of probably the most stressful periods of my life. And it's so I didn't postpone in my case. I had already had children by the time I chose to go and do my PhD, so I can't really speak to that part of it. I was also incredibly fortunate to have a very caring father who lives just 5 minutes from our home, and who was retired and helped tremendously with the childcare. So I think that that and then also the flexibility to work part-time. So there were many things in my favor that allowed me to go forward with my studies. But I can tell you, I'm very happy that phase is over.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, especially for mothers, there's kind of juggling, or like you feel like you also need to be a caring mother, and that I think it's also maybe a struggle for a lot of the other female students. I was wondering if Nicole and Anna have anything else to add to this, and Derek, feel free to also add your opinion.
Well, I'm happy to share some observations. I mean, didn't have children while I was at grad school, but we have a daughter now, who was very young when my husband was doing his PhD, and I was working full time, trying to find the balance there. And then I can reflect on friends who have had the experience, and people, I guess, have different ways of making it work. I know some women who had their children and then were full-time moms through the toddler years, and then when they were able to go to school, worked on the PhD between the bus drop-off and pickup. And then others who have done it through COVID, and 2 little ones, and working on a dissertation. And I think what is so helpful is reducing the expectations maybe that one puts on themselves in terms of the time, and just recognizing that there's a lot happening, and to be kind to yourself with the timelines, and recognizing that there's lots of support that's needed in those years, but it's not impossible, and there's all sorts of creative ways, but it's not to say that it won't be challenging.
Right. And also, I think I can add, I think all of the panelists have also touched on this. If you need to say no, just say no, and then get support from other people or from different resources, and so that knowing that you don't have to kind of take all of these on your own, I think that can also be helpful. Anything the panelists wanted to add to this question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't really have much to add because I don't have children, but I liked what Nicole said, just as far as everybody's different and everybody has a different path. So I guess just from observing, I think, and I hear this a lot too, which is like, it never feels like the right time. So I think got to consider just like what is right for you and make decisions accordingly, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in this of like, okay, well, not during my PhD, not during my postdoc, and just delay and prioritize different things. But I think you just have to do what's right for you. So maybe take some time, think about that, and think about a plan for yourself as far as just like what makes sense for you, as opposed to what society is telling you is right.
Right. So
Can I just quickly just add, it's not always planned, right? So sometimes babies happen. And so if you find yourself in that situation too, whether you're a grad student, postdoc, know that there's supports, if you need help or advice, just to reach out. And you're not alone.
Yes. So I hope all kind of female participants feel inspired, and listening to female kind of PhD graduates who have done this, and it can be done, but just you need to kind of find a balance. So the next question is a question about networking. The question is, what are your suggestions for ways to establish connections with people in education or academic sector? Because I think there is the myth that academics don't network, or you're not supposed to do that in academia. That's maybe only for industry people. So yeah, and then how can you make those connections long lasting and meaningful? Yeah, that's the question. Maybe Derek can start this time first.
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm curious what others might say about this too, because I think it really might depend on your context in your field. And for example, I'm historically in more areas where business cards aren't really a thing, but in the last few years, I've been doing a lot more with engineers and STEM and that sort of thing. And everywhere, everyone has business cards, and it's like you need 10 on you at any given time, which is sort of surprising to me, because everything's so digital now. I'm thinking, well, why are we carrying paper around? But it's just a different cultural practice, is my point. And that's something that I sort of learned, that context is quite different. So our answers might be very dependent upon the audience and what areas you're in and the kinds of work that you do and all that. I would say that there's there's obviously an increasing amount of digital networking, and I'm sure Anna could speak to this with her TikTok experiences and stuff, but there's certainly the digital ways in which we network, and that has a certain benefit and that has certain practicality, but it also has limitations in terms of how deep they can go, and sometimes there's an overloading of that kind of networking, and you wonder how much time you're spending on that versus kind of the quality of interactions you might getting, and certainly there's a opportunistic thread in the digital world that everyone's sort of reaching out for their own self-interests, and you're sort of trying to navigate and negotiate those kinds of areas. I think can be interesting, and what kind of digital mediums are you on, or different social media platforms, and how are those platforms suiting you professionally versus personally? What's the crossover? These are the kinds of questions I think that are worth asking for networking. And it's interesting, after I teach digital media, I'm a digital literacy, so this is kind of an area I think about a lot. And after the pandemic, where we kind of went all digital, for a good chunk of time, coming off of that, I really reflected a bit more about. It's not like I've done research on this yet, but certainly the different kinds of relationships and networking in person might do as opposed to the digital, because we kind of had just a digital chunk of that for a couple of years, and then really reflecting on doing a lot more personal engagement. And I have to say, I've sort of weaned myself off more of the digital and tried to sort of make the time for more in-person, interpersonal kinds of networking. Again, you can't do the volume. You don't have the same kind of numbers and outreach you would in a digital context, but those relationships you are cultivating will probably be much more lasting. For every 30 connections you might make online, maybe 1 or 2 might actually manifest into something, whereas in person, if you meet 5 people, you might have half of them that manifest into something in the future. So in some ways, there's different kinds of benefits to both. So I guess that's just my own personal story, and reflecting about how networking is great, super important, but sort of the mediums in which we're working in might depend on what we want and sort of our intentions behind it. I do think there's a sense in which, are you networking just for yourself, or is it really to build relationships kind of in an authentic way with integrity? And that kind of reflection, I think, will draw in a certain kind of audience that the other one may not. And that's I think a big part of this too. But anyway, I'll hear from others, so I'm curious.
Right, I echo Derek, because I think I participated in network training from MyTex, and I think the facilitators were saying actually carrying a business card and seeing something actually physical is actually very helpful, more helpful than people think, or they're thinking business card are kind of archaic and people are not using it anymore. We're all kind of scanning or adding. I think those physical things, or like in-person kind of communication contact, is still powerful. Especially, I think a lot of things are happening online right now. People might have actually fatigue from communication online. So I guess that's my kind of thoughts. And then I don't know who else wants to. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to add to that. I think Derek had a lot of good points, and I fully believe that the in-person works a lot better than the online networking that we've done over the past few years. I think for me, I also agree it varies a lot discipline by discipline. For me, the 2 places, so I guess to preface, I think networking is super important. You kind of just never know when these people will, come back into your life, or you'll need to reach out to them. So I think it's really important to kind of really kind of hone that network. But for me, though, I guess the main places my networks have come from is from going to the same conferences. So it's kind of like every year I typically go, or every few years I go to the same conferences and I see the same people. And just from seeing them give talks and following their research, you just get to know them, and then you kind of catch up, and it affects you in a lot of ways, right? As far as students, collaborators, there's just a huge benefit of people that do different techniques. I think there's a huge benefit of doing that. The other way that I've really found is just from kind of my immediate colleagues at all the places I've worked. So a lot of like most of the people that I like did my PhD with, I did a postdoc in a huge lab that was like 70 people, so like 35 PhD students, 35 postdocs. So you just get to know a lot of people from that. Obviously, I'm not like best friends with all of them, but you can kind of just reach out and say like, hey, I have this like connection, could you help me with this or whatnot? So I think the networking is super, super important, but there's probably a lot of different ways to do it nowadays.
Right. Okay, what about Nicole and Isabel?
Okay, sure. I'm happy to follow up. I suppose I think about when I was at that point of being like, I really would like to get archaeology into schools and but not really knowing where to go or where to begin. And I think following up on your point, Anna, those connections that you do have and who they can connect you with, that was a big place for me, is that I, started to be able to see where there were people in the education world that were not too far removed from my close contacts. And so following those threads. But then I also started to realize that within the different school districts, the Aboriginal Education Department specifically was really well aligned with where my hope of sharing content could find a home. And so they were really wonderful in terms of connecting me with schools. And through that, realized that the school districts are really very different from one another, and learning, and asking who are the best people to connect with. Also, I reached out to some of the science teacher associations that I thought were aligned, and so archaeology has some natural connections with science and social studies. And so I connected with those teachers associations, and this was like right before COVID, and I remember going to the science teachers meeting just to learn what it's about, because it's a new space for me, and so that I learned a lot there and met a lot of really lovely people. And I tried to be brave, and I went to the evening dinner where there were very few people, but I thought, well, I don't know anybody, but why not, and that actually ended up being a really fun night, and I've continued connecting with that group every year since. And COVID hit, but then we went online, and so that worked out well. So sometimes just like moving yourself out of your comfort zone a little bit, to have those in-person exchanges, I think in those cases really, really mattered. And then let's see, but then of course, social media too. You can connect with a lot of groups online as well, and just start to get a sense for the lay of the land, and who you may want to connect with, and who you might resonate with. Oh, and then also, what has been really interesting for me to learn is about the educators who are in all sorts of different industries, disciplines, backgrounds, government agencies, companies, and so on, who are really engaged in some sort of education and outreach. And so Parks Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, those were great connections for me as well, because they also were having teacher pro D events, and so then after making those connections and now going into school, something I do to just stay connected with people is have a little newsletter, Archaeology in Schools newsletter that goes out quarterly, and so that's a nice way to stay in touch. And people will often respond and, oh, hey, how's it going, or here's an idea you might want to share with the group. So that's been fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing your experiences. Yeah, I think that's really nice, a newsletter, because I felt like that's very genuine, and it has a natural kind of frequency. Then it's kind of, there's some things happening, so I want people kind of to know. So it's very kind of natural in a way to stay connected, and people don't feel overwhelmed if you're kind of trying to be, yeah, how is it going? Like that. Yeah. So I guess this is very good. Thanks so much, Nicole. And Isabel, what about you?
Well, yes to everything that has been said, and I think so. The kind of the themes that really, I would say, lay the groundwork for this networking, piece and question are things that all the others have talked about. Is like, and that you too, Ran, just said, in terms of, and I know this word is overused, but being authentic, right? So there's so many ideas and people, out there. And so when I reach out to somebody, it really is genuine. Like, I'm excited about something they've said, or it's, it has provoked some thinking, or there was, something about them. So I would say, in terms of with the networking, with, everyone that you could potentially network with, go towards the people or connect with the people that you have some you feel something, right, in that relationship. And then the other word, the other concepts that come to mind, Derek was mentioning being integrity. And then I think generosity is a really key concept in networking. And this was also mentioned by the others. And I have really, I think, learned to be more generous, which is not something I think I necessarily was as a younger person. But I learned that both in the discipline of adult education and definitely in the field of educational development, the field that I'm in terms of enhancing teaching and learning. And so with sharing what I'm learning, sharing resources I've developed, sharing, pieces of information, but also kind of filtering my thoughts and then sharing in that way, I do think there's a lot to be said about generosity when it comes to networking. So the authenticity, the integrity, the generosity.
Right. Thank you so much for your advice and sharing experiences. I think now I'm going to move to the more practical kind of getting hired, because there are questions about how do kind of PhD students, how can they find a contract or a sessional lecture position as a PhD student, and what are the most valuable skills if they're kind of trying to get this kind of position. It's more about kind of maybe pursuing a teaching career, or navigating the kind of the job hunting field, or the job hunting kind of process while doing your PhD. Did anyone want to get started on that?
I don't mind starting. I think one of the challenges with this is there's just a lot to keep in mind. There's many aspects of this. I actually have a template email of tips that I send to people, friends, colleagues that are on the academic job market, that are just all the tips that I kind of kept track of and acquired throughout my process. So if anybody's interested, feel free to just send me an email. I'm happy to share that with anybody. I think it's also quite discipline specific, but for sure, I guess within engineering academics. So I'm obviously a tenured track assistant professor position. So I have teaching and research and service duties. So the application process is, we probably have a whole panel on just that itself, and what skills are necessary for that. But I guess my main piece of advice is keep in mind that it's a long process. People often have to apply like multiple years in a row, in my experience. You have to kind of find a position that works for you as far as the department, them having an opening, them being interested in your research, it being a good fit, it being in a place where you want to live. And so I think it just takes a lot of like scouting and looking at the positions that are out there and kind of working with your mentors and colleagues to hone your application, and then applying widely, but to places that make sense for you personally as well. And yeah, just yeah, I guess that's kind of where my where I'll stop.
Right.
I can go next. So when I started my PhD, my intention was not. I went into a PhD without the intention to pursue a faculty position. So I would, in response to this question, I would invite you to think about teaching very broadly, because there's so many ways to teach. And of course, when we are in a PhD program, we are being mentored and supported by faculty members who may be guiding us or want or supporting us towards having that kind of position, which is may or may not be what you want to do. So thinking broadly about what it is that you kind of where you want to go and explore, I would think is great. In terms of the skills that have been most valuable for me in my current position at the Teaching and Learning Center, I wrote down adaptability, collaboration, and ability to learn, because there is so much that has changed in teaching and learning, and that ability to learn and be flexible and is really essential. So yeah, I'll pause there.
All right.
Yeah, I can just jump in on that. I agree the adaptability is so important, and being able to think about employment in multiple ways. A big part of that, I think, is just planning, and knowing that it takes many years to sort of develop some of these skills. So even starting off in graduate school, it's never a bad thing to sort of keep thinking about this long-term, kind of 5-year, 7-year, how you adapt, how you want to shift. And I know for me, I mean, I'm in the cheap seats because I'm in a faculty position, but I mean, I was I did 2 postdocs, I taught. I mean, I had a good chunk of time between my PhD and the faculty position, and I got to a point of thinking I was going to leave and not pursue that academic job. And then just when I made that decision, of course, something came out of the blue, and it worked. And I'm not saying that's the moral of the story. It might not have worked, but I really had to get to that place in myself of being okay with moving on. And I think looking back on that, I mean, I'd come back a little bit later in my life after doing other things, very committed to that goal of doing an academic job. It's just harder for me to kind of walk away at that point because I'd really committed. And I think in that process, what I know now, and certainly what I've observed of various colleagues and friends, as was just discussed, is there are these multiple ways of doing interesting, innovative education work that isn't just in the university. And in fact, I think more people are exploring those ways because the university is a very specific place, and there's specific parameters. And if especially if you're in a tenure track position at UBC, there's a certain level of, there's a lot of research and publishing, and that may not be something that people are wanting. They want to teach more, and there's more of aspects in which they want to explore other possibilities of professionalizing and doing workshops and such. So there are so many different possibilities, and I would just really encourage exploring those, even if there is a sense of the academic is what you want. I think there are possibilities that may not be aware, as present. And I know for me that those came about later than I would have liked to have. I think I could have entertained those earlier, and that might have shifted the way I, pursued life after a PhD. Certainly emotionally would have helped me life after a PhD, that sort of emotional adaptability and resilience that might have been nice to know there are options other than that one thing that just kept being the focus. Yeah. I mean, that was a little bit of a ramble, I apologize, but sort of tried to hit a fair different things there. So.
No, not at all. I think it's also encouraging to hear you say that you can actually go back to it, or you can actually decide later, and that it's not late and you are not kind of missed your chances, or kind of your life is ruined, or like if you haven't get a tenure track position by say 30 or right after you graduate, you are kind of you're kind of out of this field or out of this profession. So I guess also maybe demystifying that there if you do other things, it will also add to your experience and that won't go wasted. So I think that's very very encouraging as well. Yeah.
May I add just a little bit?
Yeah.
Is that I guess to add on to what some of the things that were said, that the tenure track position is one path, but there are many other paths for education or being an educator, and many of those are in places that you might not necessarily think of right away as educational institutions. And so I come back to government, or there's nonprofits or NGOs. A lot of the time, like you can have a role in these where you are educating in a way that's very related to your interests. But I would just encourage like that exploration of all the different sectors, beginning with those ones that really connect to your interests and your background, and sometimes there might not be a specific job, but you can create one, and not to overlook that, and if there's something that you feel like this would be a great thing, how do I do that? Sometimes there's little ways, and you can be creative and make it happen too. So that's been an interesting process for me. There aren't a lot of archaeological educators out there. Now, I can't say I'm supporting myself on that. I have other other jobs, but yeah, you never know. You don't have to necessarily look for the specific job call always.
Right. I want to ask a follow-up question on like creating a job. So are you maybe referring specifically to kind of teaching archaeology to high school students, or at that aspect of your job, or do you have a very specific example of how to go about doing that? Because that sounds very good. I was like, oh, that sounds good. How do I go about doing that?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know that I'm necessarily the model to look at, but I've been inspired by others, like marine biologists, for example, who have created their own company about that is focused on camps, youth camps, and getting them out and working together to monitor some aspect of the ocean that's then connected to another big program. They might also have school presentations or school talks. So different things like that could be an option.
Right.
I'm sure there's, so that's one example that comes to mind.
Right. I saw there's the question of like what other type of ways to get into education and teaching. So I think Nicole has already mentioned some of the things in government or NGOs. And also if you don't know about the Career Center, there are actually career educators at the center. So they're kind of facilitating workshops or kind of have one-on-one advising and kind of developing programming for get you ready to the job market. So I guess that's all part of the education if you want to conceive education in a broader kind of sense. So I hope that answers your question, because I think we were kind of on this topic about what else if apart from the kind of tenure track position. So that's kind of our goal. Yeah. Isabel, you have already spoken on this one, right? Or have you? I lost track because I was also checking the chat question.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yes. There's another question, I think also from the pre-submitted question. It's about kind of the tenure teaching kind of track or professor of teaching. Is that becoming more common, or is that do you have more positions in that kind of track, or how does that work, and where do people find those positions?
Well, I can just say in our department, we've hired, I think, 10 people in the last 3 years, and over half of them have been educational leadership positions. So, you know, and I know that's happening more at the university. You know, I think numbers are different in different departments, different faculties, but it's certainly, I would say, an increase.
Yeah, I think also just I have the same observation as Derek, and also just I guess from a philosophical level, I honestly think it makes more sense, which is why a lot of departments are moving in this way. Whereas I think we have these expectations that people that are amazing researchers are also amazing teachers, and I don't think that's necessarily the case a lot of the time. So I actually really think from a university point of view, it makes a lot of sense to just have dedicated teaching faculty that are like really outstanding teachers. So I definitely in our department in biomedical engineering, like we have 3 of them now, and I think more spots as well that will come up in the next few years. And I would like to see them get more common as well.
Right. What else from Isabel or Nicole, or anything to add to this?
Is the question specifically around, is it becoming more common, or was there kind of a other piece to that question that you were interested in?
Is it become more common, or also how do you go about finding it? And also I have another question about what are the kind of requirements? Is that different from the kind of the traditional tenure track position? If you were to apply for this kind of teaching track, what kind of requirement is of those applicants? And are these kind of more competitive or less competitive or equally competitive compared to the traditional tenure track position, so to speak? Yeah, I think that kind of, yeah.
I certainly can't speak to all of that, but as Anna was saying, I mean, these positions are focused, you are evaluated on your teaching and your service. And so what I've noticed about people who are moving into ed leadership positions, which is the term that's used at UBC, is that they are people who definitely have a real love for teaching, and for whom they may also love research, and continue to do some of it, and they recognize that this is not what they will be evaluated on as they move through their career. Yeah, I can't, in terms of what's required in terms of a job description, there is typically a teaching dossier, a teaching philosophy with a teaching philosophy statement, and sometimes a separate educational leadership philosophy statement. Sometimes they're blended together, and sometimes they're presented separately. And then the other thing that is more and more common is a statement around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are some of the things that I have seen that some, either faculty members come to our center and with asking for some feedback on their dossier and those different pieces, or people who are in non-tenure track positions and who are applying for the ed leadership positions will also come for some feedback and support around developing some of those documents.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Derek, for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else to add on the kind of the teaching leadership or kind of tenure track teaching positions? Or how do you go about finding it? Is it also posted on the same kind of website as the research positions? Just about the practical kind of questions of where do students kind of go apply for this type of positions, and how long is the kind of the process from the time when they see a posting to when it's actually landing on a job? Like how much time should people be expecting?
I haven't applied for any academic positions, tenure track positions, so I can't speak to that.
So are you asking like how much time it takes to like look for it or to apply for it, or what are you specifically interested in?
Say if a position comes up in September, or is there a specific time when the positions are being posted more like in a batch kind of way?
I see. Okay. Sorry, I kind of misunderstood. I guess, so it depends on where. So Canada tends to, for the most part, from what I've experienced, be aligned with the US cycle. And the US cycle is pretty much set, right? So they'll have a cycle every year where it's they have deadlines that start in October and end in December as like final submissions for your whole packages. Then interviews will take place. Usually there will be an initial like 30-minute Zoom interview that happens in January, and then in-person interviews for whatever number of candidates in the February-March timeframe. In general, most of the Canadian faculty searches follow this, but they can happen at any time of year here, and that's the same in Europe as well. So there's no standard cycle there. Those are kind of like the three places I've lived, so the ones I'm aware of. So I would just like, it's kind of an annual cycle, but you kind of always have to keep your eyes open, because even in the US and in Canada, like there are often postings out of cycle, or if there's a special opportunity or something like that. So it's kind of just a good thing to have if you're looking for jobs, or like, kind of a year period when you want to be applying. Just keep your eye out all the time, because things just pop up, and it's good to just be aware of what's out there.
Right. And then I also see a question about teaching or research, especially for STEM students. It's so different from STEM research. How can one learn more about it and evaluate their teaching interventions better? Yeah, or how can they get better at teaching? I think that's also one of the questions that's pre-submitted. Yeah, well, how can they make teaching more engaging or interesting? Yes, if any of the panelists want to kind of speak to that question.
I can definitely speak to it, Anna. Sorry, I saw you also were going to speak to it. I'll say that at the Center for Teaching, Learning and Technology, there are so many offerings to support graduate students in terms of their professional growth in teaching. And one of the programs that's run both on the faculty side and also the graduate student side is the formative peer review of teaching, where you can have someone who comes and provides some feedback on your teaching. That is a really helpful way. If the process is done well, it can be a very helpful way of getting insight into your teaching and into what's working. And then the other thing is, if you are teaching then to do some formative feedback with your students. So to be asking them for their feedback and perspectives, not just relying on the student experience of instruction surveys, but initiating your own formative feedback. So if any of that's of interest to you, you can reach out to the CTLT or to myself, and then I can direct you to the right person at the CTLT.
Right. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Yeah, I think in my experience, there's tons of workshops at the university. Like that's why it's such a great environment for all this stuff, right? There's just so many opportunities to learn and get involved in things. And so I think that's a great way to do it as to participate in these workshops. And I completely echo Isabel's recommendation to get feedback from your students. It's a really hard thing to just do on your own volition, but I think it's probably the best way to actually learn and grow, but you have to kind of be vulnerable and put yourself out there to that feedback, which like can be painful sometimes, but it's a really like, that's a great idea.
Great. Nicole, do you have anything to add to that?
Not so much, but just to echo, yeah, getting feedback is invaluable, and and just being vulnerable, of course, and that was something that is something that has been very helpful, just to understand and learn, where you could achieve more clarity or experiential opportunities, what the students think. They have great ideas. Yeah.
There's another question related to teaching that's actually pre-submitted. It's about if I kind of don't have experience teaching like a full course, if I only kind of TA full courses, how do you get kind of maybe hired or offered a position with teaching like a university course? Because I think TA is not necessarily considered like teaching like a course, and sometimes they do say, you need to have like teaching experience, not TA experience. So how do you kind of go about navigating that?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that stood out for me when Nicole was sharing earlier was around, you do all these things in graduate school and you pick up all these skills. And so I guess two things. Don't take job ads at face value. They are going to put their, ideal situation, right, is that you've had, sole responsibility for a course, maybe you've designed curriculum, whatever. So everything that you're doing, if you have partial responsibility, if you're grading, but you're not in front of students, if you're doing guest lectures, it all counts. Please, it's heartbreaking when I hear people say, I've just done this, right? Like I've just graded, or I've just been behind the scenes, or so really like you are going to be your best advocate and you have so many skills. So don't be deterred by what's there, go for it. And continue to accept and look for opportunities to build your teaching skills. So that's me on my soapbox.
Thanks so much, Isabel.
Could I ask a question? I don't know if this is a done thing, but do postdocs or PhD students, is it possible to like propose a course within a department that they could teach sessionally? I know that sometimes that I've seen examples of where that happens, but I don't know how common it is. It depends on the department. And I guess the other thought that just came to mind is maybe even looking at local community colleges for, sometimes there might be a course that they need an instructor for, and those won't get the wide circulation maybe that some of the other teaching jobs might have. So maybe. But anyway, I'm just curious about the sessional options.
Right. I think I have that question myself about maybe if I wanted to kind of create a new course that's kind of maybe for certain things, or like because I like objects and I'm researching on tea. So yeah, because mine was like, oh, I can do all of these things, but I'm not entirely sure how to navigate that, or if it's possible for every kind of PhD student say, oh, this is related to my kind of interest or research interest, therefore I want to create like a new course. I'm not sure how that's the regulations with that. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think that's something I guess I would really love to do. Maybe some other PhD students will also love to do. So I guess that's maybe a question for the department, and also maybe for Jackie for later maybe. Anyways, that's kind of my off tangent question.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I like the idea of it, and I think it probably highly depends on the department. We definitely hire sessional lecturers. The problem in engineering departments is, for accreditation purposes, a certain number of our courses have to be taught by professional engineers. So that's where our main limitations come in, but a lot of other departments wouldn't have those same limitations. So I think it's highly depends on the department.
Right. Okay. Okay, I see what Isabel is saying
So
here.
I'm just going to say, like, when I host or ran a postdoc program, what was quite common, or not quite common, but common within our area, was guest lecturing within courses that faculty were already doing. And it really depends on the faculty, because some junior faculty actually need that teaching for their own tenure and promotion. But if you have a more senior faculty member that you might be able to be the expert and give them some, an hour or two of their time back by guest lecturing one of their courses. So I think that's a little bit more common for senior PhDs and postdocs. And I see Anna nodding yes. That's one way I think to start, instead of doing an entire course might be more challenging.
Right. Okay, so I remember Anna was saying you have like a list of your tips navigating the application processes. So I think I might just email you later about that tip sheet and just kind of circulate to the participants for the day, if that's okay. I think they will benefit immensely from that tip. And are there any final questions from the audience? Because I think I've already addressed, in my opinion, all of them, or close to all of them that I've seen. And also, I think the panelists have already answered some of the questions in the chat in text format. Oh yeah, I think Connie just put out the link for our feedback. So if you if the participants today can take a few minutes to send your feedback in, it's highly appreciative of that. I guess if there's no further questions, this will be the end of our session for today. Thank you all for your time and for participating. And thank you all the panelists for being here and sharing their wisdom and knowledge. Thanks so much.